This is lesson 6-2, fractions and decimals. Our central question, how can you write equivalent fractions and decimals? And this picture here just shows a few examples of some fractions to decimals, and we're going to talk about how you do that. There's no vocab for this lesson. Okay, example number 1. We're going from a decimal to a fraction. Now, how we do that is we find the last digit, so that would be the digit all the way to the right, and in this case it's the 4, and I have to figure out what place the 4 is in, and the 4 is in the tenths place. This is why it's very important to know your place value for decimals, and we do have something in our journal for that, so if you need to look back at the places, please look at your journal. So the 4 is in the tenths place, so all we do is put 4 over 10, and that's our fraction. But we're going to try to get our fraction in simplest form, because we always want to try to get it in its smallest form. So I know that 4 and 10 are both even numbers, so I can divide them both by 2. 4 divided by 2 is 2, and 10 divided by 2 is 5. And that's going to be my simplest form because neither of those can be divided by the same number evenly. So my fraction is 2/5. Okay, now we're going from a fraction to a decimal. And the way you do that is simply by dividing. Your numerator always goes on the inside, and your denominator goes on the outside. So you can see I put my numerator, the 3 on the inside, and the 4 on the outside. And now I just divide like normal. I know 4 cannot go into 3, so I put a 0 up here. Remember, I have to add a decimal and a 0 to make this possible. And I bring that decimal straight up. Now I say to myself, how many times can 4 go into 30? And it can go in 7 times. 7 times 4 is 28, so I subtract, and I have 2. 4 cannot go into 2, so I need to add another 0 to bring that down. Then I say, how many times does 4 go into 20? It goes in 5 times evenly. So that's my decimal. 75 hundredths. So if you're going from a fraction to a decimal, you simply divide. You put the numerator on the inside, denominator on the outside. Don't get yourself confused by putting the bigger number inside, because that's not always going to be the case. Numerator, no matter what number it is, goes on the inside. Okay? And if it's too small, then you have to add a decimal and a 0. Bring the decimal up and start dividing. All right, if you were confused in example number 1, I want you to write this down on your homework. So again, we're going from a decimal to a fraction. So what we do is we look at the last digit to the right, which is the 6. The 6 is in the hundredths place. So I put 36 over 100 because it was in the hundredths place. And then all I do is reduce it. 36 and 100 are both even numbers. So I'm just going to go ahead and do repeated division. You could do finding the greatest common factor and do it that way. I'm going to do repeated division. So I'm going to divide them both by 2. Okay, 36 divided by 2 is 18. And 100 divided by 2 is 50. Then I can divide by 2 again because they're both even numbers. 18 divided by 2 is 9, and 50 divided by 2 is 25. And that's going to be as far as I can go, because 9 and 25 can't be divided by the same number. So my fraction is 9/25. Okay, again, if you were confused in example number 2, I want you to write this down because it's the same thing. Going from a fraction to a decimal. When we go from a fraction to a decimal, we just divide. Remember I said the numerator has to go inside. So 13 goes inside, 20 goes outside. I know that 20 cannot go into 1, so I put a 0 above that. 20 cannot go into 13, so I put a 0 above that. Now remember, since it can't go into either of those, 1 or 13, we put a decimal and a 0. Bring that decimal right up. And now we say how many times 20 can go into 130. And it can go in 6 times. 6 times 20 is 120. We subtract, we get 10. 20 cannot go into 10, so we add a 0 on there. We will really put it up here and bring it down. So we say how many times can 20 go into 100? And it goes in evenly 5 times. So our decimal is 65 hundredths. So just really quick to recap, if you're going from a fraction to a decimal, you just divide. If you're going from a decimal to a fraction, you have to see where the last digit is and you put it over that number. So if it's in the tenths place, you put it over 10. If it's in the hundredths place, you put it over 100, and so on. Okay, here are your practice problems. The first 2, you need to write them as a fraction, and the second 2, you need to write them as a decimal. Go back and rewatch the video if you need to see how to do that again. Don't forget a word problem or a question, and rate your understanding.